These are the highlights from round 2 of the FV8 F1 season from Catalunya, Spain. Qualifying saw Shock in 6th, just under a second slower than Simo in 5th. Razor starting 4th behind Trigger in P3 with a 22.1. PK in 2nd sporting a new livery, and Mant on pole with a 120.5. Qualifying was a high pressure one lap shootout, and we'll ride on board with Simon and Peter to show how the drivers' laps unfolded. To the race start, and everyone got away well off the line, with Christic moving up to the top spot before the first corner, and Trigger overtaking Razor around the outside of turn 1. TC then found himself running wide on the outside of turn 3 and was unlucky enough to touch the grass, just enough to spin and drop to P6. Shock was the beneficiary, as TC also clipped the S-Factor car just enough to send his younger brother into the dirt also. Shock moving up to P4 from P6 on the grid. Okay, a replay of the start from on board the Razorback Racing entry, and we see a clean, even start from all the drivers. And as we enter turn 1, we'll see Trigger just pop through around the outside of turn 1, which then becomes the inside of turn 2, of course, putting TC on the outside for the next corner. Razor tries the crossback in turn 3, but on cold tyres and with heavy fuel, the car understeers out to the edge of the track and onto the grass. We see a further setback for TC later in the lap as he tries to make up for lost time. The car just bottoms out on the ripple strip at turn 9, and the heavy impact and severe damage would see him limp back to the pits and go a lap down early in the race. Still on lap 1, and Shock misses to turn 7 at chicane, while Simon inherits an easy 4th position. Towards the end of lap 1, we see a battle emerge for P2 between Rogers and Trzynski, with aggressive driving and contact from both drivers through the early stages of the race. It's Trigger who draws first blood at the end of lap 1, knocking Manta's rear end out from behind him. But doing the gentlemanly thing and nudging him right again. The two drivers battled in the early laps, and it became apparent that Manta had the straight line speed while Trigger was faster through the turns. Unable to pass from a slipstream down the straight, Trigger dived under brakes into turn 1 of lap 5 to regain second position, but not without a knock on the rear from Rogers. By the end of lap 5, Christic led by 7.8 seconds from Trzynski, who was only 7/10 from Rogers. While Simon found himself alone, trailing 3rd spot by 20 seconds and ahead of Shock by 11.9 seconds, with TC already a lap down due to a problematic first lap. Lap 8 and we see the straight line advantage of the TMA Honda versus the Black Bull. But the difference in braking abilities results in contact, and both drivers leave the track temporarily at turn 1. The next lap, and a scare for Manta as he spins his rear wheels on the ripple strip of turn 11 and slides off of the track and into the barrier, resulting in strong but not terminal damage to the front end. A diagnostic lap 9 indicated the need to pit on lap 10 to repair the damage, meaning a mandatory 3-stop race from then on. Lap 11 and PK pits from the lead with an 18.8 second advantage over Trzynski in P2, who was now well clear of the TMA Honda and able to improve his speed in clean air. As Kristik exited the pits, it was a drag race down the straight pit exit, but it was Trigger who had done enough to move into P1. But then, in a race-changing moment, with struggling soft tyres, he ran off the track in turn 2 and handed the lead straight back to the Monster Energy car. Clearly needing a fresh set of rubber, Trzynski pitted on lap 12, and when he re-emerged from the pits he found himself in P3 behind the TMA Honda. Meanwhile, TC was busy putting in consistent laps to be back in the hunt, and he passed Shock at the start of lap 14. What was tidy driving from both cars in turn 3 became an almost disaster soon after, as Shock came close to contact with a locked front left wheel at turn 5. Unfazed, TC was using all of the track and then some as his time soon dropped to the 1 minute 25s. Simon's race almost ended upon his first pit entry, but he survived to stay ahead of TC on exit from pit lane. The pair were close enough through Simon's outlap, which then became Razor's in-lap for pit stop number 2 on lap 19, where his pit lane entry was somewhat more conservative, but cost him time. By the start of lap 20, PK was still leading, now by 12.5 seconds over Manta, who on soft tyres had pulled away from Trigger by 11 seconds. In turn, Trigger was leading Simon by almost a minute, and Razor emerged from the pits trailing the S-Factor car by 22 seconds. With Shock a couple of laps down on the leaders. Kristik lapped Simon in position 4 by the end of lap 20, while it would take Manta another 2 laps to catch up to the same position, and in a clumsy manoeuvre which saw him knock the back of Simon's car on entry to the final corner of the lap. Two laps later and the leader was in sight, but Manta had burnt through his tyres and fuel to get to that position and needed his second pit stop, having done 14 laps on the softs. Hurting tyres were becoming a factor as Simon suffered a near miss in turn 2. This enabled Razor to close in and make his move at the turn 10 hairpin and regain P4. but not without a brotherly shove for his efforts. Simo's softs had appeared to have all but given up, as a tractionless exit in Sector 3 saw him spin into the wall and lose his front left wheel. More thrills and spills followed before TC entered pit lane again on lap 30. As he did, PK crossed the line ahead of Manta, the gap down to 9 seconds. Trigger, a further 30 seconds down the road, was ahead of Razor, the first car off of the lead lap. In turn, he was 30 seconds ahead of Simon in 5th, and Shock was on lap 28. Lap 32 and Manta had finally caught the leader. On different strategies, Christic avoided any potential tangles by allowing the second place man through, knowing he'd be in a stronger position to fight later in the race. In a great display of racing from both parties, TC unlapped himself from Trzynski around the outside into turn 5. Manta started to pay for his makeshift strategy, as the extra stint on softs meant burning more fuel, of which he had started light on. By lap 40 he had a lead of 18 seconds over Christic, who would pit for the last time. Trigger would need to work hard to close a 70-second gap in the last 10 laps. Similarly, TC had only just unlapped himself within the last few laps from Trigger and would have to be content with the prospect of P4. Simon, who had raced in isolation for the most part, was almost a lap behind 4th place and saw his isolation end as Christic crucially emerged in front of him from his pit stop. And in P6, Badams trailed 5th place by 2 minutes. Christic was now free to push his softs for the final 10 laps to close in on Manta. As he did, trouble emerged from pit lane, as Badams had all but come to a stop on the pit lane, and a shocked Simon ran into the back of him. Simon disengaged his pit limiter and overtook him in the pit lane, which would see him receive a drive-through penalty and a disastrous 6 trips down the pit lane for the afternoon. Back to the lead, and Manta was short shifting and lifting off early in a desperate bid to cede the checkered flag. If Christic maintained his pace, it would be impossible to keep him behind. But the reliability issues which proved terminal in Canada returned to the Monster Energy car, and the mechanical fault saw him spin into the wall, resulting in light damage and a potential rhythm-changing shock to the driver. But the TMA Honda car was so exhausted of fuel that it could do nothing with this advantage, and on the first corner of the final lap, Christic took the lead to secure his first win of the season. Manta crawled over the line in P2. As his car shut down, Christic celebrated. Drzezinski crossed in third to round out the podium. TC recovered well for fourth. Simon's many frustrating trips to the pit lane still wouldn't see him lose fifth place. And Schock finished where he started in P6 to bag his first points of the season.